What you're looking at here is the entire frame and chassis for a 1980 Corvette that we're working on here in the shop. We're actually fixing up this frame and chassis and have a body from another 80 Corvette we're going to put on top of it. Now, of course, there'll be an engine and transmission and every other thing in here. But I thought this would be a great opportunity for some of y'all to see some stuff that you don't regularly get to see because you have a body and an engine and everything else in a car. So I'd like to show off some of the various steering and suspension components that are on lots of different cars. Let's check them out. Now let's take a look at some of the parts we can see here. This would be the passenger side front. We have control arms. An upper control arm, sometimes referred to as the A arm, and a lower control arm, sometimes referred to as an A arm. In fact, this is part of an SLA suspension, a short, long arm suspension. See, the upper is shorter than the lower. That's your short, long arm suspension. We have ball joints. We have an upper ball joint. We have a lower ball joint. We have a coil spring. There's a shock absorber inside that spring that mounts from the bottom. Also here in the front, we have a sway bar and the sway bar link. Here in Michigan, we're always replacing these sway bar links. They always rust out and break. Not too bad of a job to replace. Now, if you take a look at the top of our control arm, you're going to see some control arm bushings. They're very important. Keep things from rattling back and forth and causing damage. Keeps everything in good and in line. This is the top of our shock absorber. That's the top of the ball joint. You can see it's got a grease fitting on it. Now, that grease fitting is pointing towards the rear of the vehicle. That's because when the body's on there, you wouldn't be able to get a grease fitting, or I should say a grease gun, onto that grease fitting. So it's pointed backwards so that way you can get one on very easily. Looking from the perspective that you would be in if you were the transmission, you would be taking a look here. This is our steering gear. The steering column, all that mechanism would attach right here, and there's our steering gear. This down here is our power steering. It's a power steering cylinder. Now this is fairly unique. You don't see that on a lot of cars. This has a little bit different power steering setup than most other vehicles, even from its time period. We have a drag link that runs across here that the tie rods connect to. We have an inner tie rod. There's one just like it, the inner tie rod end. There's one just like it on the opposite side of the vehicle. This piece right here that connects to the steering gear is called a pitman arm. Looking at the passenger side of the vehicle, we see the idler arm. And that also connects to the drag link. And there is an inner tie rod end here. Looking down at the passenger side, and there you find the same thing on the driver's side. Here you actually have your steering knuckle that comes down and attaches to the outer tie rod end. Then this is a sleeve. This piece here is adjustable. That moves the inner and outer tie rods in and out so the vehicle can be aligned properly. We can also see our brake line here and a little bit of our fuel lines coming down here as well. Our rear suspension is set up considerably different. You would have a drive shaft that would come back from your transmission and connect to our rear end differential here. You notice this vehicle is independent rear suspension, and it has these small half shafts here that have regular universal joints that mount them to the rear end and the wheel bearing on this side and that side. We also have shock absorbers, very similar to those that we have in the front. Now this is a unique feature to the Corvette. This has one spring, one leaf spring. It's a mono type spring, very unique design. It looks just like a traditional leaf spring. In fact, it's even constructed the same. But instead of having two, it only has one. And these Corvettes were known to ride pretty harsh. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our 1980 Corvette chassis and frame. A very unique way of looking at a Corvette that most people would never get to see.